or Ramsey County. I'm also a doula and lactation educator that works with in collaboration with Family Health. Also a co-facilitator of Club Dad and Doulas for Dads. And I'd just like to thank everybody for really being here with us this morning as we jump off this lovely event. I know initially here at first today we're going to have a panel of gentlemen that we're going to present today, and I'm going to allow each and every one of those gentlemen to kind of introduce themselves as far as the organization they're affiliated with, their names, organization, their titles, organizations they're affiliated with, and what those organizations do. All right, so correction, really quick. We have men and women that we're going to be on part of this panel, so forgive me on that. But I am going to recite these individuals' names and then allow them to kind of take it away and give a very quick 2 to 3 minute, roughly 2 to 3 minute introduction of him and who they do and what they do. So the first person that we have joining our panel today is Mr. Clarence Jones.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for that. I have to just honestly say I'm excited about this event. Ever since Tamiko and LaSharon asked me to be a part of this. I am the community health strategist for a group that's called the Human Partnership, and we are a collaboration or a coalition of organizations that are working around public health issues. And we work around issues that the community identifies as important. We then work with researchers in the academic community to get the data that is required. And then we give the information back to the community for them to make decisions about how they want to address those issues. I am a fatherhood practitioner. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for inviting. I'm a doula, perinatal educator, those kind of things, and have been involved in fatherhood for a long time. And so part of my joy really is in terms of really helping to have healthy children. I love that. I mean, the bottom line for me is that the work that I do is really around helping healthy children, healthy families, healthy community. So thank you for the time.
All right, thank you. And the next person I'd like to introduce to everybody or allow him to introduce himself, Mr. Minkara Tizet.
It's really good to see you all. My name is Minkara Tizet. Brother William, I'm not correcting you. I'm just going to say how the elders call me. They call me Brother Minkara. And I don't know if brother is like less formal than Mr., but you are Brother William. So anyways, my formal title is Brother Minkara. My role at the Cultural Wellness Center is I function as the griot of psychology and psychiatry. That work really is centered around Black thought, how Black people think about things, and then how we consider what to do with the things we think about. So I'm a father of 2. I've been parenting for about 25 years, actually over 25 years from last weekend. I have been studying and living in the life of a Black person for over 48 years. So my experience as a Black man in America is what qualifies me to articulate and express the thoughts that I'm going to share with you today. I've also studied the thinking of Black people for about 20 years intentionally. Like, what are the things, the practices that Black people think, and how have Black people thought about solving the problems that they have versus how other people have attempted to solve our problems or tell us about those problems. And then finally, my work at the Cultural Wellness Center really has allowed me for the last 7 years to really study the way that I think and how I think about what it will take to transform and change community. And that's partly what I'll also be presenting and talking and thinking with you about today. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful to be here. Hotep.
All right, thank you. Next person that I want to introduce is Ms. Takayla Lightfield.
Thank you, William. Han mitakiapi ampe today chante washtea iushkia nape chi zapie wakshaska washewin makiapie. So hello everyone. Actually the translation is hello my relatives. Today I greet you with an open heart and a handshake. My Lakota name is White Flower Good Woman. My English name is Tagala. I work for the Division of Indian Work in Minneapolis as the Ninde Doula Project Program Coordinator. And Ninde means my heart in Ojibwe. I've also been one of the Ninde doulas for 5 years now. I'm also an Indigenous breastfeeding counselor and co-leader of the Indigenous Breastfeeding Coalition of Minnesota, as well as one of the organizing members of the Indigenous Milk Medicine Collective, which is more of an online campaign to recognize lactating people in the Indigenous world. But yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be sharing this space with you all today.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ms. Rochelle Johnson.
Hey, William, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for having me here today. My name is Rochelle Johnson. I am the nursing director at Regents Hospital in St. Paul, hospital that's part of Health Partners system of 8 hospitals. Excited to join the conversation today and talk a little bit about the work that we're doing to make inclusive places for birthing people in gigantic institutions. So happy to be here, happy to talk to y'all.
All right, thank you, Ms. Johnson. So next panelist that we have to present here is Ms. Joy McAfee.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joy McAfee. I am the owner and founder of Joy the Village Doula, LLC. I am specifically a postpartum doula. I provide postpartum doula services to families in St. Paul and around St. Paul, specifically guiding them through their postpartum healing, navigating what that looks like, bringing a new tiny human into their household, and helping them to navigate nourishing themselves with both rest and with food as well. And then also navigating the household needs with a new one and what that looks like. I am a mother of 2. I bring forward the perspective of implicit bias from within our community of color. I also bring forward the perspective of implicit bias as it relates to other cultures, other communities relating to us as well. I bring that perspective both as a mother, my own personal perspective, having dealt with that in my breastfeeding journey, having dealt with that in my postpartum healing journey, having struggled with postpartum depression and anxiety. I bring forward that perspective as well. And I'm really happy to be a part of this panel today and excited to be invited.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Ms. Cindy Kaigama.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cindy Kaigama, and I was asked to come here today to share my birth story. I have 2 children, a 6-year-old little girl and an 8-year-old boy, and I work for Minnesota Community Care as their health equity design partner. My job is focused on internal and external work from the lens of health equity. That's focused on partnering with community and our internal organization to create systems, policies, and systems and policy changes from the lens of health equity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so as we, before we get started, jump into the individual presentations, just kind of want to give everybody a layout of the agenda. So as you see, we just did our welcome and bios. We're going to go into this these individual presentations that will last us about 60 minutes. And then after that, we'll break out into some breakout rooms for about 20 minutes to discuss essentially like a call to action, what we will do as individuals and in our work, in our workplaces to address implicit bias in the work that we do. From that, we will go to moderated dialogue that will be led by Ms. LaSherry McDonald, and then we will have a report out after that, and then closing and wrap up led by Ms. Tamiko Ralston. So without further ado, I see I'm running a tad bit behind, so y'all forgive me, please. I tend to get off track a little bit from time to time. But to those who know me, that's no surprise. So I'd like to start off with Mr. Jones, if you'd like to start with your presentation, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Once again, I want to say thank you for the invitation to be a part of this this conference. I can honestly say this. I have been excited ever since I had the invitation. It resonates with me. Now, I recently retired. I'm an old guy. I've been involved in fatherhood for a long time, more than 25 years in fatherhood specifically, but more than 50 years since I've been working in the community. So it's really a part of who I am. And so I'm really grateful for this time. And so I want to be honest, because when I was invited to be a part of this session, I was told I could say what I needed to say. So I've already told you I'm old. I'm not necessarily all the time politically correct, but I'm respectful. But I want to talk about this issue. So when I was asked to talk about fathers from my perspective, I want to talk about this issue of being tolerated but not valued. And I think that that's important, because in the work that I've done, what I've seen has been the fact that we tolerate men, we tolerate fathers, but we don't necessarily value them. And so I just want to talk from my perspective. And I'm also glad that I'm going first so I can learn a lot, okay? So, you know, I know there's a lot of new training. But my first story, and I've said this recently, was the fact that my daughter had a child by someone that I didn't particularly care for. And I remember that I didn't dislike him. I just, just the situation itself was kind of interesting. But at any rate, she delivered a child. And I remember we had all the family there together and everybody was talking, with her, and the child died. And so the family gathered together and, we were trying to console each other. But what I noticed was that in that room, he was there, but nobody talked to him. I saw him over in a corner, in a bundle, in a ball. And my heart went out, because what it said to me was that nobody thought about the fact that he also was struggling as a father. People thought that he was strong, that, he's just a man and those kinds of things. And so he didn't necessarily need to be consoled and things like that. And I thought it was at that moment that I came to my own personal epiphany about the fact that he was tolerated, but he wasn't valued. He was still a father. He still had emotions and things like that. And so when I thought about this particular topic about being tolerated and not valued, I think about sometimes how we do, especially in my work with young men, how we many times we find them tolerated in the families, but not necessarily valued in the families. They many times men have to go through a lot of changes in order to be accepted. For example, it's as though holding a baby. Guys love to hold their babies. I think they do. Well, most guys do. But it's really funny that when a guy holds a baby, generally there's someone who is critical of them, of how they hold the baby. I read a book one time that said there are like 827 different ways to hold a baby. All of them are correct. And so why is it that when a guy holds a baby, there's always somebody there to be has a comment about them and what they do? When a guy is the thing that I thought about in terms of implicit bias when I started talking about the family and about how men are perceived, is that when there's a party and he comes in and he has Payless shoes versus Nike shoes, how people perceive that and how they think that he is not being a good guy, or he's not being a real good father because he did not buy the best things for his child. So therefore there's a bias that, oh, he's not a good man. And one of the things that happens so many times in this work, and I find this, is that there are always people that are willing to be critical of him, but not necessarily constructive criticism. And part of what I struggle with in terms of this work is the fact that it's important for us to be able to understand what real value does this man have. And I think for many of us who are involved in this work, whether we believe it or not, there are times where we see fathers, we see men, and we instantly have an opinion about who they are or what they are. They may not necessarily be what we necessarily think they should be. I think many times in the work that I do that I have to many times talk to grandparents. I have to talk to other family members about not being so critical of them just because he doesn't fit your pattern of what you think a person should be. There's a lot of implicit bias that happens in this work. And I think that part of what I'm excited about is being able to enter into this conversation in a way in which we began to examine it and we began to talk about it. I think it's interesting in terms of fathers when we start talking about this issue in terms of how they parent their children. Fathers are assumed to be angry because they have a loud voice. That's that, they don't care because they don't speak softer and those kinds of things. There's a bias that they're being mean, but that's not necessarily true. That's not necessarily true. Fathers just do things differently. And so many times when a father raises his voice, there are people that assume that he is not being a loving or not being caring. And that's not what I feel. So part of what I'm saying today is the fact that the implicit bias that we have for men, we need to examine. We need to think about. We need to discuss. And I think that that's what makes this particular session so exciting for me. Is that I really believe that fathers bring more value than we have allowed them to. I think even as practitioners, we have biases around fathers. They use different words. They like rough and tumble play. And they pay attention to their child in a different kind of way. And so just because they don't do it the way that we think they should do it, we should not assume that they're not caring, that they're not involved, and they don't want to be there with the child. And so for me, today was an exciting day because first of all, it gives me a chance to say these kinds of things. But even more than that, give me a chance to meet with you all and to see how we might be able to work together in terms of making our children and our families healthier. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. Really appreciate your words of wisdom and insight on that. Next, I want to go to Brother Minkara and kind of give us talk to us about your frame of reference in terms of implicit bias, the work that you are doing with the Cultural Wellness Center, projects that you all are doing or working toward, and your short and long-term vision as far as your work with fathers, fatherhood, and how important that role that plays in the culture.
Hotep, Brother William, and thank you, Elder Clarence, for opening us up and getting us started. I am always anxious to present in these environments because birthing predominantly is seen as the realm of feminine energy, that the process of birthing is focused on the mother and the child. And I'd like to tread lightly because when talking about birthing and implicit bias, I tend to get a little upset and enraged. So I don't actually talk about racism. So I'm thinking of racism and white supremacy when I talk about implicit bias. I can't separate those realities from the idea that we live in a society that functions as in an anti-Black manner. So Black is always negated. And this is not to place us in a victim position, it's just to articulate the thinking of the society and the thinking that produces kind of racist habits and policies as a regular function of being. So my study for the preparing with this was deep and long. So I just apologize for that. First is the change in images of psychological slavery by Naeem Akbar. The second text that I used to prepare to present the 10 minutes that I have for you is The Psychology of Self-Hate and Self-Defeat by Amos Wilson. And then finally, the ISIS papers, The Keys to Color by Drs. Frances Cress Wilson. So I've come to the environment realizing that the birthing environment for Black children specifically is toxic and promotes death. So that's the position that I take. That the not being able to care for the Black family, as Elder Clarence talks about, in the father not being valued but tolerated, and not seeing the value in fatherhood, is not just a thing that happens for Black people, but that is a perpetuated mistruth that's perpetuated by the system that devalues or dismisses the Black man's presence in the society as one who doesn't contribute or has the capacity to contribute to the society. So that's part of what we're dealing with. But on top of that, what happens is, because at the Cultural Wellness Center, what we talk about is individualism, lack of culture, and loss of community is what makes people sick. So children are the first kind of understanding or barometer or indicator of the health of a community. How healthy are the children when they're born? Are they born on time within the birthing time system that's safe and healthy for them? And are they born into an environment that can care for the life of the child for the next 25 years? So that's kind of the underlying question. Frances Cress Welsing says that people actually shouldn't have birth, Black people specifically, which she was referring to, shouldn't actually give birth until at least the age 30 for women and 35 for men. Now, those aren't my words, those are her words. As an ancestor, that's what the knowledge she left us. But as I thought about what she was offering, is I think about my own birthing and family experience. I gave birth, or my wife and I gave birth to our first child when I was 24. That child is now 25. She turned 25 last weekend. What we've learned is we were prepared, but we were ill-prepared for her. We were prepared to love her. We were prepared to care for her, but we did not understand the basic premise of what gets birthed at a childbirth. That the birthing of a childbirth gives birth to multiple identities and multiple entities for the people who are responsible for creating the community around the birth and the child who is being birthed to the community. I know I'm going to run out of time, but I'm going to try and give it to you as fast as I can, as condensed as I can, and we maybe can talk about it later. But what happens as a result of white supremacy, racism, and specifically the institution of slavery that Naeem Akbar gives us, has placed on us the inability and the undeveloped capacity to function in the roles of both mother, father, child, to have those functions, those roles fully developed. So what do I mean by that? My mother gave birth to me at 17. So I thought by waiting to give birth till I was 24, I was actually being more prepared. I actually had a job. The woman that I was with, I was married to her. We actually had a home that we lived in. We had 2 vehicles that we drove. And she was educated and I was kind of rebellious against education. I didn't like the idea of being trained, but eventually I did have training. For example, I was trained to be or to see perinatal education and lactation specialists as a role that people play in the community in 2019. So that role then gave me the thought of, how then do we talk about the idea of parenting in a system that is implicitly biased against Black people? Not just Black men, not just Black women, but the very child that's going to be born is going to grow up in a system that, one, hates it and then teaches it, two, to hate itself. That's not my words. These are the words of the ancestors that have gone before us. That's what Frances Cress says. She talks about this idea of genetic annihilation and the fear that drives within the undermine, the unconscious of the society. And so this idea of unraveling the unconscious in order to get what we need to get to is the work of the Cultural Wellness Center. How do we do that? The Cultural Wellness Center says people have to study themselves. So implicit bias in terms of white supremacy and racism is something that white people have to study. Black people have to understand it and have a vision beyond it. So we have to, one, white people have to study white supremacy, racism, and how it functions, why it functions, and why they created it, what fear in the psyche produces it. And Black people, because it's not our problem necessarily directly, we have to understand it so that we can see what it is. And then we have to then create a vision beyond that. And so what the Cultural Wellness Center does is we say that our mission is to unleash the power of people to build community and to heal themselves. And how do we do that? in the birthing world, the way that the Cultural Wellness Center came into development was out of the birthing world. So 20, 30 years ago, the question was asked to Elder Atum, the founder of the Cultural Wellness Center, why do Black babies die? She said, I'm not interested in telling you why Black babies die. I'm interested in you understanding what helps Black babies live. What gives, quote unquote, BIPOC children the capacity to live beyond the death of dying at 2 times the rate of other people. What gives them the capacity, the audaciousness to live beyond that. And what gives them the audaciousness to live beyond it is we believe that babies come to the planet conscious, that we as human beings make a conscious decision to come to the planet, give our life resource to keep the planet alive. And that within the context of the Black community, that's been destroyed because we have been treated as though we are invisible and that we don't matter, despite the fact that we have contributed to every aspect of developing what America is and could be, even to the highest office. So, but the anti-Blackness and the invisibility forces Black people to participate in a system that is one already set to hate them and to not appreciate their presence or to value the process that they're attempting to give back to the planet. And I'm gonna close here, William, by saying that part of what we believe has to take place is, one, you have to begin to develop relationships with institutions. So community members, community people have to be able to develop relationships with institutions. But before institution relationships can be built, people within our community have to be able to build relationships for ourselves that help us talk about what will the practices be for childbirthing? What will the processes be for the baby to come to the family? So one of the things that I talk about in my family, my daughter's 25, she's planning to get married. She's getting married a year after we gave birth to her. And that the plan for her to get married then is the impetus for her to talk to us about what it means to be birthing a family. So now her and her partner are going to create the primary building blocks for community and family development, which is we are going to couple and then we are going to think about what it means to give life together. That's what they're talking about right now. So they're talking, she says to me, Dad, when do you think is a good age to give a baby to birth to the baby? Now you see, I'm not even talking about racism anymore. I'm just talking about what's important to me, which is the birth of the next generation. When do you think it's a good idea to give birth? Well, because I read Frances Cress Welsing and I believe what she says to me, I said, well, you know what? You guys should probably wait till you're about 30. She's like, that's a long time. I said, well, you waited this long to get married, you know, what's the longer wait to give birth to something? And in the meantime, think about what you're really giving birth to, which is a family. And that you and your partner are really deciding that you're going to bring a life to the planet and you're going to consciously support that life financially, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, mentally, however way you can support that life for the next 25 years, you're gonna put all your resources into it. To this day, I drive the car that I drive because my kids decided they wanted to go to private schools. I did too. So because I went to private schools, I cleaned the chalkboards, but because I went to private schools, I wanted to have them have the same education. So I don't drive a Bentley, you know, Brother William. I don't even know what that looks like on the inside. I don't drive a BMW, but I sacrifice to ensure that they have what they need. The marriage that their mom and I had lasted 17 years, which was 15 years longer than my mom's marriage lasts. So that is what we're attempting to recover from. And I'm saying that the basis of all of that pain, the suffering, the divorce, the separation, the raising of the children, all of it is impacted by white supremacy, racism, and bias. But that's not our focus. Our focus is on what will get us into the future. And then I'm done. What will get us to the future is culture. And we define culture as they consist of the practices that people give themselves continuity and cohesion across generation. Culture consists of a highly set of pattern, unspoken implicit rules, behaviors, and thoughts that control everything we do. It controls how we see ourselves and how we think about ourselves. And so at the Cultural Wellness Center, and what I believe is the primary work that we have to do is create birthing teams that surround the life of the child before they get here. So I said to my daughter, you're getting married. How many people are you having in this wedding? She says, I'm having 12 people. I said, 12 people? That's more people than Jesus had almost. But just, you know, I said, well, what are you going to do with them? And she said, well, they're going to just support me while I get married. I said, well, let's think of them as our primary birthing team. those are the people that when the baby comes, we're going to ask to support the baby's life and give support to the baby's life, their energy, their life force. And I said to her partner, who are these groomsmen and what is their job? And he said, well, the same thing. He's like, well, their job is to help me stay married. And da, 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 da. I said, well, let's imagine that the future is beyond the marriage is that you guys want to give birth. And he said, yeah, that's right. I said, well, so let's imagine that they're part of your birthing team. So now you've not only developed this idea of community surrounding the life that ain't even here yet. We're just planning for this life. And we've developed the support for the family, for the community to develop around the baby. That is the strategy of the Cultural Wellness Center. That is what people will produce when they can think for themselves and understand the role that white supremacy, racism has played and impacted the family, the Black family and the Black community. And that's me attempting not to be upset, Brother William, talking about racism. So,
Appreciate you, Brother Minkara. Thank you very much. Next, Miss Lightfield.
Okay, hello everyone. Again, I just want to say before I start that my mind is like going like this, even though I'm just like beginning my presentation now. When I was asked to be a part of this, I was like, what do I have to say? You know, because there are so many roles that I play in the community. Not only am I a doula, not only, you know, am I one of the leaders, or I just was told in an email that I was one of the leaders. Like, I don't consider myself that, but like I'm a mom and I'm a student at the U. And so I'm just like, how do I get all this down into like 10 minutes and sound coherent? So I know that this has been a hot topic for a very long time, but I always want to acknowledge that the reason we are here today and having some of the issues that we're having like in our Native community is because this country and these systems that we're trying to work in and operate in were built on the stolen land of Indigenous people and then also on the back of Black and Brown people since colonization. And so when you think about how the US government has been trying to eradicate our people or assimilate us through genocide, boarding schools, the American Indian Relocation Act, and the list goes on, people often say like, stop talking about that, Tequila, you know, that's old news. I didn't do that. My grandparents didn't do that to your people. And I'm like, but we can't forget what has happened. And it's also still happening today. So, you know, and through implicit bias. No, I don't go into a birth in the hospital and think like this nurse is racist, but how she treats like my family that I'm working with is because of all of the history of our people, right? And what she has been like, whether it was comments she heard from her family, from a teacher, you know, something like that. Like it's like just ingrained into our brains. And I am too, right? Because one of the questions was like, what is your organization or what are you doing personally to you know, like what is it? Or in relation to, what does it say? Sorry. Basically, how are you addressing implicit bias? And I was like, oh my gosh, I do it too, right? Like I go into the hospital and I'm like, I'm light skinned, so I pass, you know, as a white person or mixed or whatever. So, but when I have like a mixed race couple or you know, like dark skinned doula client, like I go in there thinking like, okay, you know, how are they going to be treated? Like I have to be an extra set of eyes and ears in case anything happens. Like I'm not an advocate, but I need to like work with my families or my moms like before we get there to be active participants, to ask questions, to, you know, like speak up for themselves. And then I'm there to help and guide. But I'm also doing that thing of like, who's going to be in the room with us when I see them, like how are they going to act? Like, do I need, you know, so I was like, what am I doing as well? So I'm still thinking about that. But, you know, I really think that just acknowledging that and the history that we've gone through and everything that's been done to us, our main goal through NINDAY, or like that I always talk about, is that we're trying to prevent our birthing people and our babies from dying, because we still have the highest rates of infant, or like one of the highest rates of maternal and infant mortality. And so it's in our community. In the last couple of years that I've been doing this work, nothing, no one from Ninde or any of the families that we served, anything like that has happened. But we're trying to connect with a family, and we weren't able to, and they had a beautiful birth until the very end. And then mom, dad, baby went home. They were home for a couple weeks, or not even, excuse me, like less than 5 days. But mom wasn't feeling well, went back to the emergency room, and then she was she was seen but sent home, and then she died the next day. And it's like, this was like 2 years ago. This was right before the pandemic hit. So it's like, why is this happening? Why wasn't she being taken care of? Why wasn't she listened to? And so that's just kind of like what I'm trying to do with Ninde, is make sure that there's support, make sure there's extra eyes and ears, and then have that follow-up. Because a lot of times once you're released from the hospital or discharged from the hospital, it's like, okay, it's so overwhelming. Like, who do I talk to, like, about lactation? Like, and me as an educated person with access, like I struggled through that. And I was like, this breastfeeding my baby shouldn't be this hard. Getting help and like troubleshooting should not be this hard. So that's why I became, trained, so that I can like help these families, and then within my scope, and then be like, okay, well, here, let me help you call and make this appointment. Because a lot of times our families like that we're working with don't even know what's available or how to access it. And then also, one thing that we're doing, because we work in the urban environment, we're working with people that don't have access to our traditional medicines and foods, don't have access to, even just like cultural practices or traditions. And so we're really just trying to bring that back around lactation. What are some traditional ways we used to increase our milk supply? And then also like birthing and postpartum, and then raising those babies. We have high incidence of sudden infant death syndrome, and it was high, and then in the 80s, when the Back to Sleep campaign was started nationwide, they saw decreased rates of SIDS in every single other race except for American Indians. Ours has either continued to rise or stayed the same, kind of like plateaued. But I see that because we're always shamed for our practices, right? Like we traditionally did bed sharing and co-sleeping. All of a sudden we're told, no, that's not safe. You need to put your baby over here, away from you, or in another room. And then I did a training on like back to sleep and safe sleep, and also had an elder that works in the community like give a different perspective. And it's like flat hard surface, like no extra blankets and stuffed animals and stuff on their back, da 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 da. And it's like, traditionally that's what we did. That's like so many tribes. There are 573 federally recognized tribes plus other tribes that aren't recognized in the United States, and almost all of them have some form of cradle board. And a cradle board ticks all the boxes of the Back to Sleep like campaign, like everything. And it's like, that's what we traditionally used to do, and that's where we had our babies sleeping, and it was safe. And now it's so hard to get access to a cradle board, and they're really expensive, and we don't have the means to like make them, or the knowledge to make them ourselves. So that's one thing that I'm working on doing right now, is having someone come in and teach our doulas how to make cradle boards. And so we know every step of the way, and we'll do it in teams so that we can, like get it finished. Because the last time I know of a cradle board workshop that happened in the cities was over 5 years ago. And I think maybe 5 cradle boards were finished, and it's just not enough. And that's one thing. And then also baby swings too. Like the swings that we see in the baby bumpers were actually created by an Indigenous First Nations woman from Canada. If you didn't know that fun fact. But all those things, is trying to get back to that and like learn those things and learn how to make them and learn how to do them, because when we're working with these families and we're invited to that space and we can be there in person in birth, it's such a sacred, beautiful, like, moment, and intimate too. And then, I feel so honored to be there and to be welcoming the babies. And then something can mess it up so easily, right? And it can be super traumatic, or this nurse has said this, or, the provider's not believing the mom. And so I don't know. My time's not up, but it's like, we're just trying to, like, get back to making moss bags, cradle boards, getting our medicines, providing the support, like, I usually don't talk, I feel like, to people, like, I like preaching to the choir is what I feel like I'm doing today, but usually I'm trying to talk to community about like what a doula is and how we can provide the support and how we can do this. And so I just refer to us as like the aunties, right? Because like traditionally it was the women, the aunties, the grandmothers that helped the birthing woman or birthing person. And fathers had a role too. And over the last few years, I've heard our elders say, where are the men's groups? Where are the men's parenting groups? We have all of these groups for moms and women, and, White Earth has the moms dosing program, but it's like, where's the support for our men? And how can we like kind of like incorporate them? I know of like one men's group that's not focused on like domestic violence and sexual assault perpetrators. It's like focusing on like, what were our traditional roles, gathering as men and like teaching this and learning how to drum and stuff like that. I know one in the cities, and it's a newer group. Like, we just don't get the funding for it. Because what do you measure there, right? And what are you working to do? So that's another thing. If we get some funding, continued funding next year, that I really want to try and do with our programming, because we do invite the partners to our programming, and we do work with them. But when we have group in person, they don't always come. And so I think if we had like a father's thing, we have one native doula that was trained about 6 years ago, but he moves away to other states and then comes back. So it's always like, are you here? Can you come teach us? Can you come, like help us make medicines and stuff? But yeah, so doing a lot of work, and I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Ms. Johnson, would you like to step up to the plate?
I do want to. I'm going to try and share my screen here, y'all. And you're just going to realize what a nerd I am, and I own it, but I have a visual to share with you. Let's see if this will pull up.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Perfect.
Not here.
All right. Just start this from the beginning. All right. I'm gonna go back one slide here. So again, just reintroducing myself, Rochelle Johnson. I work at Regions Hospital in St. Paul, and super happy to be here. These are the places where we need to be. And, I'm conscious that I'm representing a very large organization that, we talk about needing to change, and represent a group of providers and nurses who I have found to be very interested in making change, but not understanding pathways to get there. And so it is my goal as a leader in this organization to continue to just build partnerships with all of you all on the call. I think it was Minkara who said earlier, we have to build relationships between institutions and community partners. To Kayla's work as a doula, I think we're all partners in this work. And so if we do it together, I think we actually can make real change. So that's my goal as a leader here. I'm gonna see if I can advance the slide here. We all know the statistics. And I put this slide in here because I'm one of those statistics. Personally, I wasn't a nurse. My first career was in a totally different industry, doing something totally different. My first baby, I had at 27, Makara, so I didn't quite meet your 30-year mark, but it wasn't a great experience. And my baby spent a week and a half in the NICU and almost died. I had a postpartum hemorrhage, and a lot of those, some of the reasons why those happened, I think, were contributed to communication with my provider team and the care that I got. So I have some personal passion around this work. I've been personally impacted by it, and it helps to drive kind of how I help our teams understand how we need to change. So a little bit about regions. Some of you may know because some of you are great partners, but we just built a brand new birth center. It opened 2020 in July 2020, and right in the middle of a pandemic, you know, right in the middle of this chaos that we have. But there was a beautiful process around building this building and a beautiful process around creating a vision for it. The people who work in this building are, you can see the statistics there, you know, about 30% of our people who work in our birth center are people of color. But 60% of the patients that we take care of are people of color. So there's a discrepancy there, and we recognize that. And in the vision for building this building, we centered that. We centered the fact that not all of us understand the backgrounds of the patients we take care of. So it's our job to center that and start to try and figure out how we understand our patient populations better and how we can relate to our patient population better, because all of our goals is to make sure that every person who gives birth in this birth center has an experience that they expect. And they also have a positive outcome of their pregnancy and their delivery. They go home a happy, healthy family. So we created this vision of high reliability, family-centered, and health equity. Those are the three values that we do everything under. Any project that we do, any initiative that we do needs to be centered in those three things. But explicitly, which a lot of organizations haven't gotten to this point yet, through our birth center work, we made explicit plans around health equity. And that meant that we needed to start looking at our data, that we continued to build our community partnerships, and staff development was going to be the biggest part of that work. We work in an organization that values this, and so we had a lot of support. This is a cabinet that represents the 26,000 employees of Health Partners. It has the highest leadership in our organization leading it. And the goal is to make sure that we can continue to address all areas of health equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. I think we'll all agree as leaders in this work that we're not there yet as an organization, because our systems have been built from hundreds of years of historical dysfunction around taking care of people and making inclusive environments. But there's a commitment from the highest leadership level here to do better. Let's see. So this is just a little slide, and again, my nerdy brain, but I wanted to just share a few pieces of the journey that we've done over the last few years. A lot of people are talking about equity these days. And what we talk about with equity is, what's the action behind it? What are you actually doing? What are the actual steps that you're taking to disrupt some of the systems that we had in place? And so I'm not going to go through every one of these slides, but just wanted to put it out there to say, intentionally, we have people who meet regularly and focus on equity initiatives. And those equity initiatives are built into every single thing that we do. So every one of our leadership team, which there are over 60 people, who went through a year-long equity training that helps us to recognize all of our policies, procedures, everything that we do, where there's some room to be more inclusive within our language, within the processes that we have. We have built data that can be stratified by race, ethnicity, language, which has opened our eyes to where we have disparities and helped us to become more focused in the work that we're doing locally at this hospital, but also across all 8 of our birthing centers in Minnesota and Wisconsin, to break down some of those barriers. Every one of our staff members, from the nursing assistants to the housekeeping staff to the birth center leadership, have all done implicit bias training. And through the opening of our building, every single person who was oriented to this building goes through additional training related to implicit bias and health equity principles that we want them to carry out. We have lots of work going on. There's a really important patient experience focus right now on patient consent. And, you know, this came out of the work, some of the work that we've done with our doula partners, but just this idea of, and I think Takela, you talked about this a little bit of, you know, how do we support patients being their own advocates, and how do we listen in the moment? And for all of us on this call, because I know we're all like-minded, that sounds like a ridiculous statement to have to teach people, but it is. But when we say it explicitly, then that means we can hold people accountable explicitly. And so that's some of the work that we're doing there. These are just some of our partners in the community on the East Side with our birth center. And there's more, but these partners have been integral in helping us develop our programs at the birth center, helping us create pathways to understand patients better. And we're just so thankful for all of these partners, many of whom are on the call today. I wanted to leave you just with a couple of, because I agree with you, Mr. Jones, about including fathers' experiences in the birthing experience, and the work that we need to do as an institution on recognizing how we've historically not recognized fathers as an important part, but also just all patient experience in general. So a lot of the work that we've done has been around how do we hear from our patients better. I think previous to starting this work, we would hear from about 4% of our BIPOC community, which seems incredible to understand that when 60% of the people who deliver here are people of color. We were only hearing back feedback from 4% of them. That was because we made it hard for people to give us feedback. So over the last couple of years, we have changed the way that we ask for feedback. We do patient rounds every single day, but also we send texts, we send emails to people, we call them, just to make sure that we're getting a better representation. And now month to month, we hear from about 60% of people of color in the feedback that we get. So it's a great win because a lot of that feedback that we've gotten has helped us change processes and practices that we've had, helped us to listen better, and gives us concrete examples to bring back to teams on the ways that we can get better. And lastly, I wanted to talk about this car seat program that we have going on. So I'm not sure if y'all understand the impact of child safety seats in the Twin Cities and nationally, actually. It's the leading cause of death. Motor vehicle accidents are the leading cause of death for kids who are the ages of or less than 1 year old. So, and this disproportionately impacts, you know, and traumatic injury disproportionately impacts our families from African American and Latino background. So what we've done with this car seat program is every single patient that comes to the birth center actually gets visited by a car seat specialist. We used to just have car seat clinics in the firehouses, you know, in our communities. And if you're able to make it there, if you're able to have a car seat before you have a baby, if you're able to have time to go and see a firefighter to help you put it in your car, then you can get it. What we recognized is that not all families have that opportunity. They don't have language services at those car seat clinics. And so we felt like we wanted to partner with the Office of Traffic Safety to get this car seat program implemented at the site of delivery. So every single one of our families who go home get a car seat evaluation with their families, and 99% of the people who get it would recommend it to the next family who comes after them. So we're really proud of this program, and we hope it over time makes a difference. And the harm that's can sometimes be caused by accidents and motor vehicles. So those are just two stories that I wanted to tell, but most importantly, I just wanted to say that we also don't want to continue to highlight or have to use the data that's out there right now, you know, of Black and brown people dying at higher rates during birth. And we are totally on the same path of finding joy in birthing, finding support in birthing, being a place where people feel comfortable to do it, and just trying to do a lot of work around that. So I'm just happy to be here with y'all today, and I know we'll do questions and stuff later, so I'll just end there. Thanks, William.
All right, thank you. And I know we're scheduled to go into our call to action at 10:40, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to go to that later because I want to make sure that we give the last two panelists their fair amount of time and opportunity to speak. So with that being said, I'd like to open the floor for Ms. Joy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joy McAfee, as I stated before. I'm the founder of Joy the Village Doula LLC. My main focus is a postpartum doula. So I provide postpartum doula support to families. I wanted to bring before you kind of implicit bias and how it impacts our community within ourselves, from within Black and Brown people to Black and Brown people. For instance, as a mother, my story is that I struggled very heavily with postpartum depression. I heard things from my elders, things like, your body knows how to heal. Things like, it's just baby blues. Things like, you're thinking too much. Things like, you were made to do this, which sound really helpful, but were ultimately not. When what you need is, there are resources, or what you need to hear is, this is normal, or this is also a part of the journey. I wasn't hearing those particular types of things. And it started to, and also it impacted my ability to breastfeed my child and my husband's ability to receive the type of support that he needed as well, because he was hearing these things and thinking that, oh, it's nothing, it's not important. It's fine, it'll heal on its own. And he's watching me struggle, and he's also struggling because we are one, and needing the support from our elders that looked very differently than what we needed. We asked ourselves questions like, where does this come from? Why is it that our community didn't support us? Not in that moment, because in that moment we were trying to figure out how to make lactation happen and human milk feed our child. We were trying to figure out how to find the support and resources that we needed to make this time what we needed it to be. And we needed it to be sacred, right? And so rather than focusing those questions on why didn't it look like that during that time, we did a lot of looking back afterwards as we were planning the birth of our next child to determine why didn't it look like that. And my husband, he works in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so a lot of his questions turned into, where are the bias? Where does this stem from? And the research that we ended up doing together led us to some great information from Dr. Joy DeGroy. She's a psychologist and a social worker. She wrote an incredible book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome: America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. And so reading that together really helped us put together the pieces of what was missing in making our postpartum time sacred. What was missing? So some of the things that played a role was multi-generational trauma that fed into a lot of the it's just baby blues, that fed into a lot of the oh, breastfeeding is nasty, or breastfeeding is what white people do, which was something that we heard from our elders at the time as well. And then we also found out that some of that multi-generational trauma stemmed from aggressive marketing from formula companies as well. We learned all about the Fultz sisters and how they were used by the pet milk company in order to push our community away from human milk feeding and into feeding into formula feeding instead. That also plays a huge role as to why our family and the elders in our family were speaking to specifically us utilizing the bottle and moving away from breastfeeding, and why the support didn't come, not just not just the judgment, but also the support. Those things were huge, impact us in a huge way. They were great injuries to our experience as parents as well. And so ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences, both my husband's adverse child experience, my adverse child experience, the adverse child experiences of our elders and other community members that had lots to say about how we move forward as parents in our postpartum journey as first-time parents as well, that all had a lot to do. And racialized trauma, our experience birthing, even my husband being asked to sign paperwork at the hospital to specifically have his parentage listed. Why was that? Well, especially when he's saying, we are married, we are married. Why was my husband barred from going into the parent room at the hospital in order to have food while I'm going through a 12-hour induction? Why can't he eat? Those types of situations is what started our journey as being less than sacred, which is why I do this work. I want every family that I encounter, particularly families that look like me and look like my siblings and look like my parents and look like my community, to have the sacred experience in their postpartum healing that they need in order to be able to move forward in their parenting journey, both fathers and mothers, both same gender, and also non-binary families as well. And so what it is that I offer them is the tools, the coping tools that they need, equipping them with the coping tools that they need to navigate systems that are meant to bar us out, giving them the coping tools that they need to navigate the difficulties that come along with postpartum healing, giving them the tools that they need and the resources to normalize what does it mean if you happen to experience a postpartum mood disorder or postpartum anxiety? What does that look like, and how can we normalize that and make it look more supportive? Like, how as the community, how can the community rally around you if you're experiencing that and not shun you and not give you these blanket statements such as, it's just baby blues, we can do better? And what does that look like? I'm working on that every day with each family that I encounter and each family I have the privilege of serving. Culturally specific evidence-based care is what happens to make changes, is what we can do to make changes to a history of trauma, creating a future of disparities, right? So rather than allowing this history of trauma to continue to create disparities, we can bring alongside each and every family culturally specific evidence-based care that allows them to navigate their postpartum time, whether it be lactation, whether it be healing, whether it be attaching and attuning to their own child, whether it be attaching and attuning to their own partner, as postpartum bodies, as both partners, postpartum bodies are going through a lot and are very different than they were prior to their journey moving into birthing a child, prior to their journey being pregnant. And so helping them understand that, each of them understand that, is the difference between allowing these things to continue to manifest that create more and more disparities. I get the opportunity to pass traditions along. I love hearing on the call all of the men and women that are passing traditions along as it relates to postpartum healing. That is a birthright. It's absolutely a birthright. So having culturally specific evidence-based care means that people get a glimpse into their past. It means people get an opportunity to heal some of these disparities. It means people get an opportunity to have rituals and traditions lavished upon them. Their ancestors are present. They're lavished upon them as an opportunity for them to be a part of bringing in the next generation, while also being mindful of the past, and also being mindful of the impact of their elders and their ancestors in their journey, that will allow them to reach out to their elders, that will allow them to maybe be more mindful than they would have been in the past, to reach out to their elder community members and ask for help as they navigate their journey. It's everything. It's the difference between thriving and surviving. It really is. I'm working specifically on creating a community resource that pinpoints culturally specific evidence-based care. What it really looks like is a list of all of the lactation specialists, IBCLCs, folks that are midwives that know what the body is doing postpartum, that can teach doulas and other folks that go in home, whether it's a nurse that's going in home, even if it's, or whether it's an infant care specialist that's going in home, to teach people what it is that they should be looking for as it relates to postpartum healing, both maternally, paternally, and within the infant. That's what I'm working towards. And so all of those are the ways that I'm working to change the narrative, and also all of the things that Joy the Village Doula LLC is working to provide access, education, and options to everyone in the community that we have the privilege of serving. One of the last things that I will speak as far as it relates to what Joy the Village Doula LLC is doing as it relates to implicit bias, and my own experience with implicit bias in the postpartum healing time for my family as well. We really needed a doula. Like, my husband says it all the time. Why weren't you a doula? Why didn't we know about this? And I tell him all the time, reading Parent Magazine in Minnesota, I learned all about doulas. I wanted one so bad, but could I afford one? No, we couldn't. We were fighting about McDonald's burgers at the time. We could not afford a doula. And so what I offer to families as well is removing the barrier to receiving support, the financial barrier to receiving support. Do I provide high quality support? Absolutely. Is my main focus on making sure that they have everything that they need to navigate, and that they are nurtured and well rested? Absolutely. But what I also do to remove those barriers and provide high quality support is making sure that it's affordable. I know lots of doulas that are charging way more than I do, and I want to make sure that families can afford the support that they need, that they're getting the emotional support, that everyone in the household, children, adults, fathers, grandparents, extended family members, are all being able to be loved on, are all being able to feel that this time is sacred, and that they're able to find their role in the dance that is this time. And so that's what I'm doing, just really bringing forward our birthright and utilizing what it is that we have learned from our time, and what it is that I have learned from multi-generational trauma, to be able to pour into families and recreate, like, really change that narrative that is all of these blanket statements to the postpartum healing time, and really providing culturally specific evidence-based care to rally around families. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. All right, and then last but not least, Ms. Cindy, the floor is yours.
Everyone, thank you again for allowing me to be here today. So when I initially had this conversation with Tomiko, I had a very different conversation I was going to have, but the work and the experiences are so consistent that a lot of the things that I was going to talk about was already discussed prior to me coming on. So I've had to adjust what I'm going to discuss a couple times, since every time somebody said something else that I was going to say. So this has been great to be in this space to share. So I'm just going to focus on the lens of how I, as a mother and a person that was going through two different traumatic birth experiences at two different health systems, and how the experiences just got from bad to worse. I am going to be very transparent in my experience. I know I only have 10 minutes. I also want to acknowledge that I'm a strong believer in God, and that played a part in my experience of being able to have my two babies today. I have a condition a syndrome called polycystic ovary syndrome. And polycystic ovary syndrome sometimes causes disruption in your hormones, and it's like a metabolic condition or a syndrome. Rochelle is on the call, so she can correct me if I'm saying it wrong. But basically, so let me just kind of give you an introduction of who I am. So I am originally from Detroit. Michigan. My uncle was park commissioner here in Minnesota, Ed Solomon, if you knew him. That was my uncle. So I moved here in 2002 to go to graduate school and was going to be mentored by him. And I had all these great visions, and none of them included having children or a husband. I was all focused on building community so I can go back to Detroit and build community centers that were culturally and economically focused on that community. That changed. I never really had a desire to have kids because of my experiences growing up in Detroit and some of my own trauma. So I was just like, I'm just gonna be a global woman doing all this great work across the world with no husband, no child, and I'm gonna be okay. So I talked about God because that's really the narrative of how the direction of my life changed. And I have a gift of having dreams. Sometimes those are good and sometimes they're bad. I mean, not necessarily bad, but just kind of to show what's going to happen so that I can pray for those situations. And I had a dream about being married. My husband is from Nigeria. And when I was in Detroit, I heard drums, and I would hear drums all the time. And I had a dream about my husband before I met him, even though I had no desire to really be married. So fast forward, I moved to Minnesota in 2002, and I got married in 2003. Because I was told in Michigan and I had fibroids because I was misdiagnosed, I just was like, oh, well, I really can't have kids now, so I won't even think about it. Well, when I moved to Minnesota, I had a provider who was retiring. And in our first meeting, he was a OBGYN at a health system in the South Metro. And he told me I had polycystic ovary syndrome and not fibroid tumors. So I had to educate myself about what PCOS was, how it can cause you to either not have babies or have a delay in babies. It causes prediabetes or insulin resistance, facial hair, trouble losing weight. Like it's a really issue that impacts your ovaries and your metabolism. So I said, okay. So he said, you just got married. Not sure if you will be able to have children, but if you can try fertility, or you can try if you want to, because I wasn't having regular menstrual cycles. That's another side effect, is you don't always have menstrual cycles. So my husband and I got married, and it was 10 years had passed. And I did mention that my husband is Nigerian. I want to kind of throw some humor in this and not all be negative. And I don't know if you know about the culture, but after a year, if you haven't given birth to a son, sometimes they want to send you back to your village. Like, this is the thing that my husband would make fun of me and hit in our house. Like, okay, we haven't had a baby. You're 1, you're 2, or 3. Like, they want to send you packing now. And I'm like, whatever. They told us we may not be able to have kids, right? So it was a joke that we would have, but we also continued to live our life. And then it was pressed upon me that I started having dreams. And I started seeing these babies. I saw my son, who greeted me in my dream every day. And when I was at the house and said, welcome, mommy, welcome home. And then it was like I had this desire, because I was having dreams about having children, to be a parent, like after 10 years. And then one day I got a phone call from my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law had never called me before to talk about children, ever. And it was at the 10-year mark. She said, my daughter, where are my grandchildren? And I said, God willing, we'll have those babies. And she's like, I want you to give me some grandchildren before I leave. Now, didn't talk about the husband, right? Didn't talk about his contribution. It was all about me and me giving her grandchildren. So I was like, yeah, okay. So I told him, I was like, your mother's calling saying she wants grandchildren. So you might want to have a conversation with her and tell her our situation. So he was like, I'm not doing that. So in this process of me having PCOS, I did not have the most positive healthcare experiences, let alone pregnancy and birthing experiences. I constantly had to advocate for myself. And after having my second child is when I learned to go from patient to consumer. So I saw myself as a patient at first. And then after having my second child, I realized I was a consumer and I had more power than I thought. So I was told by one of the providers that I wouldn't be able to ever have children, and that I should adopt, and because kids were not in my future. But I remember I told you I had started having dreams that I was having a child. So I was like, okay. So I had very negative experiences with that provider, and she pretty much left me for dead. And I had to go back to her because I had almost died from some medicine for the PCOS. And I asked her, why didn't she help me and give me the proper education? Because I didn't know much about PCOS and the impact that it had around insulin resistance and prediabetes. And she said that, well, I didn't think you can afford the classes and I'm not sure about your insurance. So that day I told her, one, you already told me I couldn't have kids. Now you're telling me that you didn't think I had the insurance or could afford to pay for classes to help me understand about how to prevent diabetes. And I almost died as a result of that. And that I told her that today's the last day I'm going to see you, and that I'm never coming back to you again, and that you're going to provide me education of, one, how to prevent this disease and see if there's options for me to be able to have children. So I switched providers and had a series of experiences with providers in the healthcare system. And it came full circle with that same clinic who treated me, that same clinic that treated me awful. I got a contract to work on improving health outcomes and diabetes measures for people of African descent, where I was a patient, and then they actually started paying me to help them improve their outcomes. So it all kind of came full circle. And I think because of my faith in God and the gifts and callings that, were on me, that was an assignment that I had to have that experience. In retrospect, looking back, that it was some very traumatic experiences, but now have led me to be on this call with you today and have this conversation to be able to create some opportunities for action items so that we can create equitable and inclusive birthing experiences and pregnancy experiences for all people, not just women of African descent. So fast forward a little bit further, I do want to give a shout out. I had this, guy sent me this amazing provider. I am going to say her name. I hope that's okay. Her name was Sheila Solomon at Park Nicollet. And she's Indian, so I just want to say that too. So she asked me, because I had been going to her for a minute, and she's like, why don't you have kids? You're married, your husband's African. I know that's important in the culture. Have y'all got checked out? And I was like, yeah, we got checked out. They just said we couldn't have kids. So she asked me some very specific questions about my interactions with my husband and the processes of what we're doing. And she said, wait a minute, you're not doing what you need to do to have the baby. She drew me some pictures and she gave me some instructions. And between her, I always said that I think my mother went to the bush and took my picture. Like, and my husband and I joke about this because between her, the dream, and my mother-in-law, I was pregnant within 6 months. So same person who was told I couldn't have kids, the same person who almost died and was left for dead because I was taking some drugs. Now going for it, I am pregnant. And because I was told I couldn't have babies, I was sick and had the flu for 2 months. And my mother kept saying, are you pregnant? I'm like, no, they said I couldn't have babies. She said, nobody has flu for 2 months. You might want to go get checked out. So I went to, and mind you, those dreams, I was having dreams about that little boy. And I went and I found out that I was pregnant. Well, this is where the fun starts, because I didn't want to have kids. I didn't have an interest in paying attention to parenting. I was a mean auntie because I was really strict with my nieces and nephews. So I wasn't the person that was like the ideal, like I'm going to be this nurturing mother and I can't wait for this. That was not something I was interested in. So I didn't have that experience. But when I was in Michigan in undergrad, I worked for Planned Parenthood, and I was a person that, like I said, I want to be that public health person, improve community, and just do what I can to help people. So I was a person that was going around educating African American women about how to improve neonatal outcomes and infant mortality way back in college. Didn't know that I was going to be using that education for myself years later. So I ended up going to a system, and I did not have the best health care, and I was taking more drugs that did not do well with me. And I ended up having my son at 27 or 29 weeks. I lost my mucus plug at 25 weeks, and I kept telling them there was something wrong with me. These drugs are not working. And I ended up having him early. I had to be transported from one health system to another. He was in the neonatal specialty care for like 7 weeks. So it went from like one traumatic experience to another. Fast forward, I had another dream about another baby, had another child, And at that time, I almost was left for dead because I had something called hyperemesis gravidarum with dehydration, which means that I was throwing up all the time. And I lost a lot of weight. And I kept telling the doctors, like, something's not right. And they told me, well, you should be glad that you're pregnant because you're old, you have old eggs. I was 39 with my second child, and that you should be grateful that you're even pregnant. So I had to switch providers after those experiences because of how I was talked to when I was in the system. Sheila Solomon had retired, so I had to go to a different provider. Then fast forward after that, I ended up having to get a PICC line, which because I was throwing up so much, and had a home nurse. The home nurse told me that I was in a very crucial stage. I could have lose my child, and I need to go to the emergency room and be admitted. She contacted my provider and said, you need to admit her to the hospital because she is in a crucial stage and she could lose her baby and die. The provider refused to admit me to the hospital. She said that she was not going to do that. She was just going to have me to get some more fluid and send me home. Got to the hospital, they really did not want to admit me. I threatened to sue them and told them that if I died, that my family would sue them, and I would do everything I can to let everybody know how I was treated. That caused them to admit me. I ended up being in a hospital for 10 days. I lost 35 pounds in 10 days, and just had like a series of issues after another. When I got to my second child, I became empowered and said that you told me you didn't listen to me with the first child, but with the second child, I'm going to not listen to you, and I'm just going to be led by God and do what I think that I should do to keep the baby inside my womb. So I was able to carry her full term, but I just had like one traumatic experience after another with both of those babies. And it's because of those experiences that I said that I was going to change my career to improve health outcomes and reduce chronic disease in girls and women of African descent. That was the initial expectation that I had for myself, but then it kind of evolved. So I can go on because, like I said, there's so many conversations that I could have about my birthing experience, and have been encouraged to write a book about both of them to help other women. The one thing that I wanted to say is to make sure that you listen to people and don't assume that because you're a provider and that they're advocating for themselves that they don't matter, because it's their body and they're not dismissing your education. But when you listen and be a partner instead of talking at people, instead of listening to them and partnering with them, it will create a better outcome for not only you as a provider, but also for them in their birthing experience.
All right, thank you very much. So we just got to hear from 6 amazing panelists, 6 amazing stories, points of reference, and really a lot for everybody to kind of chew on and kind of take back with themselves to kind of think about the direction in which their work has been going. If they see, based on the stories and the narratives that we heard, if the direction that their work has been going is something that, you know, they're on the right track, or something they really need to reevaluate. With that, I know we kind of ran down around short on time, but I felt it was really important that, you know, individuals, the 6 individuals really got the opportunity to tell their stories in full. So I don't know if we still want to take at least 10 minutes out to do little breakout rooms to let people discuss things, or if we want to kind of like expedite the process so that we stay on schedule and move right into the moderated dialogue.
Yes, so LaSherian will take us into the call to action. She's planning to share a video first, and we will just decrease the time in the next couple things so we can stay on time. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Powerful.
Okay, well, I'll show that video. Let me.
Okay, my white people, here's an important message from a Black friend. Difficult and exhausting as this moment is, it's just going to get more challenging and more uncomfortable. But of all the battles you have to fight, the biggest one is white fatigue. White supremacy is the pernicious narrative that white people are superior to Black folks and just about everyone else. White fatigue is what happens when most white people who don't want to think of themselves as white supremacists, and who might even fight that narrative, give up and let white supremacy win. Alexander Hamilton is the poster child of white fatigue. He belonged to an anti-slavery society, but when we adopted the Constitution, he agreed to the 3/5 compromise, white fatigue's original sin. Men like Hamilton felt they couldn't get a constitution without slavery, so they gave up trying and gave actual slave owners more power. After the Civil War, we put amendments in the Constitution to guarantee equal black citizenship. White supremacy formed a resistance, but it was white fatigue that lost the cause. We pulled Union troops from the South, and the Supreme Court full of Northerners paved the way to Jim Crow and streets full of Constellation trophies. White supremacy put them up, but white fatigue whistled past them every day for over a century. The Civil Rights Movement tried to stop white supremacy by shaking most white people out of white fatigue, disrupt normal, televised violence of white supremacists, jolt people sleepwalking through white fatigue. And for a minute, it worked. Hope and equality were adrenaline shots to the conscience of America. We got a second Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act. But Martin Luther King had to die to get that last one. And then we got white fatigue. Too tired to win the war on poverty, white fatigue let it become the war on crime, then the war on drugs. White fatigue mistook mass incarceration for justice. And again, white eyes opened as black and brown bodies filled the front lines, and a host of hardly paid people were labeled essential. And then this. A knee to the neck of the facade of American equality, and an image taken by a courageous black girl just as the nation's eyes were already opening. And suddenly, white America is more awake to the distance between white life and black life than it has ever been. But right now, black America is losing sleep over white fatigue. It looms larger than any president, no matter how much of a white supremacist one proved himself to be. He might be defeated, but if the majority of white people get tired, or too busy, or distracted, or fooled into thinking we've actually won, this momentum will be killed by white fatigue. I'm telling you right now, it's gonna get more uncomfortable. It's going to be confusing and exhausting. You will want it to stop. But do not stop. New legislation isn't the end. This election isn't the end. There is no end because white supremacy will never quit, so black people cannot ever quit. You must battle white fatigue. Don't get tired. Don't ever give up. Do not wave the white flag.
What we're going to do is have a moderated dialogue, and I'm going to, ask some questions, and each panelist, you guys can just, put some things out, answer my question, when I answer these questions. So again, this is the moderated dialogue between the panelists. So the first question is, considering birth equity initiatives must happen on a multiple level, individual, community, and systems, how do you see opportunities to work collaboratively together within the BECC network? And let me know if I need to repeat anything.
Can I answer that one?
Yes.
So when I think about my experiences and how I started out as an individual patient, and then I started advocating for myself to be an influencer that created systems and policy change that actually went to the state legislation from the around equity. I think that if you have more patients, like if you're in a patient setting that have patient experience, where you can give feedback and then partner with that patient to say, like, they may be angry at the moment or what they're experiencing. And if systems say that they're doing health equity, right, and they say that they're doing these things, but a lot of times there's a level of readiness that they're not ready to talk about, as we talked about discomfort in our breakout session. So acknowledging that these things are not something that's an attack on a person individually, but we're addressing an institution of 400 or 500 years of trauma and bringing it to the space that we have to chip away collectively together to do this work, and not something that we're a personal attack against somebody. Personally, I did have personal attacks against people because of how I was treated. But at the same time, I look past that to say, what can I do now to work with the current system at the small P, like policy level, and then how do I partner at the large P level to make system change that impacts generations to come, so that my daughter and son and the people on this call, if they have children, won't have the same experiences and outcomes that we had personally. So how are we leaving legacy? So I see it as a 3-tier, where if you have a patient experience area where it was horrible, ask them and empower them from an equity lens and ownership of what can they do, with what we can do to make your experience better. Then engage the people who have the influence and authority to do that work collectively. So it's not just you're talking at them, because another thing a lot of times is the leadership doesn't have connection to what's happening in real time on the ground. They hear things, in different ways. So having them have real experiences where they hear at the leadership level, at the executive level, that help them hear the stories of the people, to give them space to share their stories so that they can create a better outcome. Because these are businesses, we do have to recognize that there's money and dollars and quality measures that are at place. So putting it in a way that makes sense. I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to continue to be business cases, but that's our reality, because these are businesses that we're running. So those are the ways that I did it personally. When I was impacted, I made a decision I was going to change my career so that I can focus on this in particularly. And then I started reaching out to people. Everybody doesn't have that tenacity, I guess, to do that. So if there's an opportunity to share a voice in the moment, give them empowerment so that they can give their feedback and then take that to make a larger change at the system-wide level, and then maybe at a federal or national level, if you have that access.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that answer. I appreciate that. Just like you said before, it's kind of like that dance, of getting that information from, what's happening on the streets to those, who can make those changes, and that's why we love doing these trainings, because we're putting community members in the same room with, you all, the providers, people who can make change. So I love that portion. Okay, so before I move on to the second question, anybody want to take a tackle at that? Any of the panelists? Okay, so go ahead. Yes.
Real quick. So I see so many opportunities as it relates to just the panelists that have been represented today. I can just imagine the opportunities that are out here with the providers that are also on call as well. But I would say even something as being in the room where it happens, as Sister Cindy just spoke to, but is really important and highly relevant to the conversation. But really making sure that the communities that it is that we're hoping to create change for are feeling that change and absolutely walking in their sacred journey with someone that's able to see them, hear them, feel them, speak wisdom into them is so important. And I have to say that doula dads and Elder Jones, I believe his name is, and then Brother, please tell me how to say your name, Minkara. Thank you. Okay, I got it. And then Brother Minkara, and all it is that they bring to the table for fathers. How incredibly powerful would it be for them to be equipped with that knowledge of walking through what it looks like to have the walking through with the information of all that they're birthing. I love how you spoke to that point. Being able to be aware of all that you are birthing and what that means, not just the responsibility of loving, caring, and rearing a child, but being aware of what together you are birthing into the world, into the community, into the next generation. That's so incredibly powerful to arm folks with that information. So I could see, to answer your question, I could see partnerships happening with the dads group, partnerships happening with the moms group, where they're being able to be given this information, and other groups in which we are really pulling on the community to provide them with things that they may need in order to have their journey be sacred, and everything it is that they need to have the support that they need. What would it look like to bring before them folks that also want that for them? I think that that's an incredible opportunity.
Yes, I definitely agree. That being seen, being heard, and being appreciated, as opposed to being tolerated. So Yes.
Most definitely. And I mean, especially since folks don't know, like I was reading Minnesota Parent Magazine, had no idea that DONA members, DONA postpartum doulas and birth doulas have to do a certain number of hours at no cost in order to, right, in order to get their certification or in order to get their training completed. If I had known that, would I have had a doula? Absolutely, but I know. And so being able to provide that information to communities so that they can get the support that's culturally specific and evidence-based, it matters, absolutely matters.
You're right, that does matters. So for the second question, and you know, I would like to see what Nkara's answers is for the second question. So how do you see opportunities for centering around individuals and communities understanding the existing implicit biases that are impacting, you know, Black and Brown families?
Yeah, I think, thanks for this question. I think actually this question is attached to the first question, which is, and I was looking for a diagram to share with you all that we use at the Cultural Wellness Center that really says, what we have to do is have institutions that take community knowledge and say, what your experience is, Cindy, matters. So, you know, you can have a place like the Cultural Wellness Center, we would say, what you are just saying to us matters. And in fact, that is how we birth initiatives. The initiative is birthed out of the genuine, organic community idea. So Doulas for Dads, for example, is a community idea that's held by Brother William, who is an employee of Ramsey County. But Brother William, for us, is a Black man who works on behalf of Black people at Ramsey County, and they get to use him as a resource. So that's how we think of community. First off, so if you are Black, to me, you represent the people, the Black people closest to you, your family, the people who taught you how to do the things you've done. Like, Cindy, your story is so powerful, the fact that it was culture that helped birth the baby. That the idea that the people in the community, the mother closest to the ancestors, the elder says, look, you have an obligation here. The obligation is to give us grandchildren. That's the first step. The second was, what can we do to help you get this baby? Everybody's telling you can't have a baby. The ancestors are telling us you're gonna have a baby. Now you guys come into agreement. She says, you gotta walk around the tree 5 times. You go outside, you walk around the tree 5 times. You're like, this is dumb. But Joy is in the background saying this is a sacred practice of remembering what it's about to give birth. Who is giving birth? And what is your responsibility in giving birth to everything that will take our civilization to the next level? So now that is invisible because we haven't had the opportunity to do the cultural translation necessary for you to even understand what Black birth means. Because you think what Black birth means the same thing that white birth, and it doesn't. It does on some level, which is we all want to be here. We all want to exist on the planet in harmony and see our practices go into the future. But at the same time, how we think about being on the planet is different. Black people that I know, how we think about culture, we say, we want to live in harmony with the planet. That means when the baby comes, the baby is a gift from the ancestors who is here to teach us about how to get into the future. That's my obligation, to create a space where the child's development becomes my primary focus. Got to give up everything I think I want to do in order to focus on what this life's need is going to be, which is why Dr. Crescent says we got to start at 30 and 35. I know that sounds late, but maturity-wise, it gives us the best opportunity to prepare for the next generation, which we are obligated to care for 25 years, financially, economically. So now I got this commitment that the state is going to tell me that I'm only obligated to care for 18 years and then let it do whatever it wants to do. That's not how we think about child rearing and childhood. So that's that sort of kind of cultural translation that we help large institutions do in order to have a community institution relationship that values Black life and Black experience as much as it does white education and white training. That's what we have to do. So in order to do that, we have to share our resources. I got to be able to say, this is what we think. I have authority over what I think and how I think about my people's thought. That's what being real gives me. So that's the conversation we're having. And in such a small amount of space, it's very difficult to show or to even talk about the evidence. Because Joy, you keep talking about the evidence, and I'm like, girl, that is just that's the pudding. It's the evidence. How do you know what you know works? Because Black people have been giving birth to babies despite the fact that you've been killing us for 400 years, despite the fact that you've enslaved us mentally and physically. we still are able to give birth and birth presidents of the United States and birth senators and generals and every aspect of life in America, but never being accepted. So anyways, I'll preach, and that's
Thank you. Yes, we definitely appreciate that.
Can I just add to that really quick, just from an experience perspective too? When so one of the things like in my work that I have to have uncomfortable conversations on a regular basis, and I acknowledge that the conversations are difficult and that you have been operating in a system where we weren't invited because you weren't expecting us to be in a leadership role. You expected us to continue to be the help. You had no expectation for us to move forward and to be leading. And now we're being blamed for things that we had no power and authority over in the first place. But because the world has evolved and changed, we got to have 400 years, 500 years of how you as a European focused dominant culture has navigated the entire globe, right? Not just the United States, but the entire globe. And then now we're coming together, and it's like, you continue, not you like personally, but as a European structure, continue to find ways to profit and make money off of our trauma, off of our experiences. And in reality, most people don't have any desire to change that, because it's going to change how they impact their dollars. It's going to change how they make money, and which means it gives us more authority and power to be equal in a sense. And that's a threat. So I think we all should acknowledge that. And it's not like I'm attacking you because you're a European woman and you're trying to help, but we were never broken. But we were taken away and sold because of capitalism globally. And now we have to be fixed, but we were never broken in the first place. I also want to acknowledge the spiritual component to this too, because I was dismissed, and I'm continually dismissed because of the gift that I have of being able to see things through dreams. And because of the standard may not be your experience, don't dismiss me and tell me that I'm lying because how I'm showing up. When I had both my children, I told the providers, you don't have to tell me what the birth of my child is, because I already had a dream about it, and God showed me that my first child was a boy. And then because I did have my first child at 37 and my second child at 39, God showed me again with the second baby, it was a girl. So when I went to because I had old eggs, and I went to the genetic counselor, and she said, we need to do this test and we need to identify the birth of your child. I told her I'm having a girl. And she said, how do you know that? I said, because God showed it to me in a dream. Well, what are you talking about? So like, I was dismissed because I'm operating in my spirituality and what I believe in, and the things that God shows me through dreams and the visions that I have, and you're telling me that I'm lying. So then when I came back and we got the results, and she's like, oh my gosh, it's a girl. I said, I told you that when we did this test. So those things are also important, like your lived experience and how your belief system, everybody believes and does things very differently, but don't discredit that person's lived experience because it's different than yours. Like, and even with the birthing process, our ancestors have been doing this. My relatives in the village are having babies with no doctors, and they got the medicine that they can go to, and they have the practices they've been doing for thousands of generations. My husband taught we had ownership by birthing and lactating and feeding babies who weren't ours as wet nurses, but then now the narrative has been changed and is controlled by European American women as leading birthing lactation processes. I had 10 different ways of how I was trying to latch my child that was born at 29 weeks and my daughter that was born at 41 weeks. None of those methods work. My Nigerian husband said, I'm going to show you how they do it in the village. He sat me down in the hospital. He squeezed the milk all in the baby's mouth, and the baby's latched. I didn't know, right? Because remember, I didn't want to have kids, but I'm listening to the European lens and the standard of how traditional methods from a European lens is how we latch on and how you do this and how you do that. But you're ignoring my husband, and he's telling you that's not working. Those babies are not going to latch on that way. And that may be great, but that's not going to happen. So he sat me down in the first child, and he sat me down with the second child, and both my children latched. So don't dismiss that cultural piece. Don't dismiss the spiritual piece, and don't dismiss the lived experience if it's not different than yours, and say that it's wrong, because just because it's different doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Yeah, that's the truth. Different don't mean wrong.
Can I just say something really quick? That the Black thought for us begins at spirituality. We articulate Black thought as spirituality, symbol, mythos, harmonium. That's how we articulate Black thought. So you begin in the spirit and you end in a harmonium.
Yep.
That we articulate white thought as object, rationality, science, technology. You begin with the object. The person is not even a being. It's a thing. And you move into technology. That's the birthing system. So that's the overlap that we got to study and create. That's what is going to get us to the next level.
Yeah, get us to the next level. You're right. And so for the question about accountability, we would like to hear from Rochelle on this part. What suggestions might you have to ensure accountability? You know, because, you know, these conversations, these trainings, it's not like a vaccine. It's not one and done, you know, even though I know it's boosters and all that stuff, but you know what I mean. So how do you ensure accountability? Do you have anything to share with us, Rochelle, on that piece? You kind of talked about it in your presentation.
There's so much to talk about with accountability with Sharon. You know, I feel like I'm just relating to what Minkara just said lastly, of the discrepancy that we have between the dominant perception of medicalized care of birthing people compared to what people are walking in the door with culturally, across different cultures and across different peoples, across the board. When I think about our healthcare providers and the people who work in the system, and you saw our stats of who works in the hospital, it's a majority dominant culture people. I think when I think about accountability, I think it's our goal, and goal is not the right word. It's our mandate that we have to start teaching the people who are doing the work how to recognize individuals as they walk in the door. And how do we keep people accountable to being curious, to being open, to not bringing their own judgments in, because those people who work in healthcare right now have their own cultures also that influence the way that they think, the way that they were brought up, their understanding, what they believe is true. And the challenge is how do you get people to step out of themselves and accept something that may be different for them as truth. And I think about Cindy's, story is so powerful. And the fact that she felt dismissed and not listened to, and I don't know, Cindy, you've told like 16 stories about places where you've felt that. I just think what happens when she inevitably, because we all do this, walk into a doctor's office with someone who doesn't come from our cultural background. What if that person, every single time, no matter their cultural background, what if they just approached every single patient with curiosity and understanding and a thought process around, maybe I don't know all of the things that are best for this patient. And like Cindy mentioned earlier, what if I approach with a thought around partnership? Our providers are highly educated and know science and are brilliant and have created processes and things that save people's lives. That's the truth. But when it comes to understanding what Cindy's talking about knowing her own body, about knowing her own background, about listening to her husband, about practices that may work for their family specifically, I don't know if we give people leeway to say, I'm gonna take a minute and listen to what they're saying and let them try what they know is best for them. I think that's the accountability that we need to start encouraging people around, is how do you partner, knowing that you bring value and that the patient brings value to whatever the plan needs to be. So that's probably not what you were getting at, LaSharon, but I feel like that.
Yes, I get it. Accountability is partnership, leveling the playing field, not looking at it as you're here and I'm there.
Exactly.
I get it. Thank you. And so for this, yes, thank you. And for this last question, for Mr. Clarence Jones and to Kayla Lightfield, how can others who are in attendance engage with the work that you're doing? How can we engage with the work that you're doing?
It's hard to answer like the earlier questions, because it's like everything is kind of like just all together. But one of the things that I'm working on, and was so glad to be connected to BECC, because I put out an ask. Okay, so when we're looking at like doulas and doula certification programs, and the state of Minnesota recognizes, you know, X amount, or Minnesota Department of Health recognizes like 6 or 7 doula certifying agencies. Well, none of them have any kind of like culture in those training programs. And so here, you know, like when we look at the numbers and when we look at those programs, it's a barrier, and it's sorry, I'm lost. I've lost my words, but most of them are white centric, very Western medical focused. And so I was like emailing the little email on that site, like, hi, like I'm trying to bring this like indigenous full spectrum doula training here to train my doulas. How can we get it recognized by the state? Because we got a small grant to try to figure out Medicaid billing, because right now we're a grant run program, but you know, like to make our programs more sustainable and be able to serve the community, like we're looking into Medicaid billing. Well, this doula training is not recognized, so therefore we can't use the midwife's MPI number to bill Medicaid for, you know, like that. And it's like, I'm like, I'm going to bring this training here anyway. The trainers came down from Canada, you know, they're First Nations women, and one's a midwife and one's a doula. And I was like, I have to bring them here anyway, because this is what's best for our community. So, you know, like in the Native community, we kind of have a spectrum of people who are finding their way back to the culture later in life, or who grew up traditionally, or, you know, or not interested, or are using, so they think that they shouldn't be doing cultural activities or things, or going to ceremonies. So like we kind of have this whole spectrum. So some of our doulas, you know, can do ceremony, sing, you know, in their language, and then some are just like learning about like their own culture, but also want to like support other people that look like them, right, in these spaces. And so I said, I'm bringing this training here. It's best for our community, but now I'm like split, because I have doulas that were trained by COPE, who we can move forward to bill Medicaid for those services, but then we have these other ones who have more like of the cultural piece and can like just serve our community better, but we're kind of going to be stuck with them. And we either need more funding to train them through COPE or through BECC. I put the ask out, and I'm so grateful. We have this subgroup that's like trying to get this indigenous full spectrum doula training recognized. But then it's not just like, oh yeah, we can add it to the list. It has to go through the legislative process. I'm the only Native person that I know that was talking about this. So how do I do that on my own to get legislation to pass to add this one thing? You know, it's probably like a line item on their stack of papers. And so you know, I didn't make it to the last meeting because we had the doula training and I didn't get to step away, but we're trying to bundle it with some other like birth equity things that are going on, and hopefully get some representatives and senators that can bring it forward on the floor. But if you want to join us, that would be great. And then another last piece is I heard one specifically, but we're talking a lot about like culturally specific evidence-based care. Thank you, Joy, for saying it that way. I also heard cultural competency, and I just really dislike that term, because, you know, we're like, oh, we're going to have our healthcare providers, our nurses, like take this cultural competence training. And it's like, no, like I like cultural awareness, or, you know, like culturally relevant or something like that. But I look to my elders for knowledge, and I have never once heard an elder say like, I'm culturally competent, or I'm competent in Ojibwe, like, you know, traditions or language or whatever. Like they'll say, I'm learning something new every day. I learn something new every day. So why are we telling like the dominant society, oh yeah, you could take this training and become culturally competent, you know, in the native community or native like culture? And it's like, no, you're not. So like, don't use that anymore. Don't fool us, and don't fool yourselves.
Yeah. I just said, you know, it's not just one shot. Boop, I'm culturally competent. Boop.
Yeah.
My implicit bias. Boop. Boop. It's not like that. So I get it. So you're just basically saying you want BECC to try to help you with getting that legislation in place so that we can have, you know, culturally competent, you know, American Indian doula training. So yes, BECC definitely sure will. Once we have Mr. Clarence Jones answer, we want to open up the question too to Minkara and Joy as well, on how BECC can help you. I know we're going a little bit over time, so yeah, as soon as y'all briefly say how BECC and even people on this call can engage, we'll then move on to the breakout room outputs.
So I think that BECC has already helped me in terms of inviting me to this conference. It has given me the opportunity to see other colleagues who are out here in the field working around this issue, and I've already thinking about who can I invite to get to know me better. One of the things about our particular organization, which is the Human Partnership, is that we believe in authentic conversation. We believe in transparency. We believe in having a positive work history. And one of the things that's so important for me in terms of working with people, you have to understand that's how we operate. You know, how can we help each other? Those are the kinds of things that I need in order for me to move ahead, is that, you know, tell me the truth, be honest with me. You know, none of us are perfect. I really care. I also believe in self-identification. I'm a prober. I will ask a bunch of questions, but what I'm really trying to figure out is what is it that you really, really want? I think that in this work that we do, sometimes we have this big umbrella, this big tent that we are in, but that's not necessarily what we're really, really passionate about. And I think that for me, again, in my work, I have to find out what you are really, really passionate about, and then I can find out how I can really, really be a supportive for you. So the thing that I think in terms of BECC, as I said many, many times in this conference, I know I'm being redundant, but I think creating a forum like this, where people like me who will sit back and I'll listen, helps me to be able to do my work better. My goal in terms of our work is healthy fathers, healthy families, healthy communities. That's what we're about. And so BECC, in fact, we've already talked about this. We have just actually created a brochure around substance abuse during pregnancy. So we want to be able to come back and be invited back so that we can talk about, you know, what's happening in our community around that. So yes, I'm finished.
Thank you. Joy or Minkara or any of the other panelists, you know, how can BECC, you know, others on the call, how can we help you and engage in your work that you're doing?
The Cultural Wellness Center, I think we function more like Wakanda. We have resources that we're willing to share with the world. We know things that other people haven't thought about thinking about. And so we're willing to share that with the world. I think that what we are interested in doing, and why I'm here specifically, is I want to, one, acknowledge that there is this work that has to be done around racial bias, white supremacy, and racism. That is the work that we have to do. That set of work belongs to a group of people who own institutions like hospitals and those sorts of things that have resources that are being used. We will partner with you to think through how to use those resources and how to engage community in the use of those resources, so that you're not asking yourself, how do we get more Black people here? You got 60% of your population is Black, you got them there, but you're not having collective conversations with them. You're having individual conversations. And again, individualism, loss of community, and lack of culture. Loss of culture is what makes us sick. That's the people's theory. That's how we articulate what has happened to us and our people. We've lost community. And so let's connect together. Let's talk about what the things we've thought about and the things you've thought about could go together and how to partner. That's why we're here. We're here because you asked us to be here.
Thank you. Yes, we definitely want all those jewels and all that stuff from Wakanda. Yes, thank you. Joy or any other panelists? Quickly.
Certainly. I would love to have BECC's help with getting in front of more folks. I would love this to be a springboard to continue to serve more families and to continue to walk families through their process that is their postpartum period. This essential time. We all know how essential that time is, that beginning to their parenting journey. We know that it begins in the womb, that the decisions that are made and the experiences that are had are all an integral part of walking into the beginning of the parenting journey. I would love to be able to walk alongside of the families that you know, to be able to provide them with the type of support that feels sacred to them. And because of what it is that I do and the gifts and talents that I've been bestowed as a person, and also through my family, and their love for the community and all the work that they have done caring for the community as well. I would love to give those gifts that I have to families and be able to provide them with the support that feels sacred to them, whether it's emotional support virtually, or whether it's being in the rooms with them as they're walking through the day-to-day. And if it means allowing families to learn or practice the sacred art, the sacred ritual, the sacred rite of laying in, and what that means for Black families as a birthright, laying in and teaching them about that. And so much more, so much more. So I would love this, like I said, just to be a springboard into providing more support for clients in their postpartum healing and in the community at large.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Anybody else before we move on? Okay, so yes, I know, yes, we're definitely at time right now, but I do want us to get a chance to report back out what we talked about in our group. So let's try to keep it like, as brief as possible. Oh, somebody said something?
Yeah, so I wanted to change it up just a little bit.
Okay.
If we can, as we're closing out, and we thank you for your time. If we could all like write a phrase or a sentence, don't hit send yet, but if you could write a phrase or a sentence of what you're taking from this feeling, whatever that means, and at 12:02, I'm going to say hit send. So 2 minutes, just write a phrase or sentence, and we're going to kind of have a flood of entries in the chat. If that makes sense, what I'm asking. So
Yes.
let's give it a second, and it could be about what happened in the breakout rooms or however. All right, hit send. Thank you so very much for your time, attention. We appreciate you all, and we look forward to following up.